I had a HR director who I still stay in contact with from AbbVie. She told me, he says, whatever job you find, you want to be in a place where you're your authentic self. I can play a role. I've had good bosses, bad bosses, all that kind of stuff, and I survived, but I'm definitely more effective when I'm myself, when I can be myself. When I interviewed I had choices before I left. Scepter was the name of the company, before they became Kinsell. I had options. I could have stayed in Florida as a vice president, actually. There was a role there. But when I saw Seth, our CEO, talk about our Parkinson's drug, he teared up. He teared up on just how impacting that drug is. And I saw that. I was like, that's where I'm working. That's the place I need to work.
From laboccupier.com, welcome to NGBideas, a podcast about leaders in Canadian life sciences and the stories behind their journey. Hi, I'm your host, Jim Wilson, and I'm speaking today with Gerald Prince, who is Senior Director of GMP Manufacturing at BlueRock Therapeutics in Toronto. If you ever have the privilege of meeting Gerald, one of the things that will strike you is his quiet confidence. Gerald was born in Stockton, California in the 1970s when the city was in no small part defined by gun violence. Unfortunately, that violence touched Gerald's family when one of his brothers was murdered, but he did not let the beginning of his path define his future. After he graduated from college, Gerald pursued jobs where he took on increasing responsibilities within organizations like Oscar Mayer, Bausch & Lomb, PepsiCo, Sanofi, and AbbVie. And as you will hear, his path eventually led him to BlueRock Therapeutics in Toronto, where he helps lead a team that is working at the forefront of regenerative medicine. Gerald's journey is a story about ambition, hard work, perseverance, and the pursuit of excellence. And I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation as much as I enjoyed being a part of it. Before we get to today's interview, we'd like to remind our listeners this podcast is part of the NGBI podcasts in support of Next Great Big Ideas, Canada's Life Sciences Summit. For details, please go to nextgreatbigideas.com. This episode of NGBideas was recorded in May 2025. Gerald, welcome to NGBideas.
Thank you, Jim. I'm happy to be here.
I'm delighted that you've been able to join us, and I'm looking forward to a conversation. Before we go there, I'd like to take a moment to explain a couple of things to our listeners. And the first one is I need to put some cards on the table. My day job is in commercial real estate, and you and I got to know one another when I had the privilege of working with you and your team at BlueRock Therapeutics on your real estate requirements at Mars in downtown Toronto. So that card on the table. And the other thing I want to mention is that this podcast is about the personal journey of leaders in Canada's life sciences community. And you were born in California.
That's right.
So you are the first non-Canadian that we are interviewing on this podcast. And the reason why I wanted to have you on as a guest is because you've got such a cool story. And you are absolutely part of the Canadian life sciences community. And I'm so looking forward to hearing more about your story and how you got to where you are. So there you go.
Outstanding. Outstanding.
So I just mentioned you were born in California, but I understand your mother was originally from Missouri and your father was from Texas. Could you tell us about them?
Yeah, my mom, let's see, she, I think, did graduate from high school, but that was about it. Became a nurse, and when I say nurse, she was a nurse's aide. She also was a teacher's aide. I think the most interesting thing about my mom is that she lived during Jim Crow, during the era. And hopefully for Canadian listeners, that you understand what Jim Crow was all about.
I'd like to talk about that in a moment because a lot of our listeners will not know what that term means, and they should.
Okay. So she was a part of that, had stories of how she worked in a restaurant and was only allowed to work in one particular area of the restaurant just based on the color of her skin, believe it or not. But she lived that era and then moved to California, I think in the 50s. She moved to LA. My father was an interesting, different story altogether, and he wanted to be an actor. Very, very smart guy. And I only say that because he did go to USC, so he did go to a university, and he studied theater there. His parents did not like this. He wanted to be an actor, and it didn't really work out for him. So it was probably wise on their part to say, no, you shouldn't go in that direction. His father was a medical doctor, and his grandfather was a medical doctor as well. These things I did not know until later on in my life. But yeah, so he went in a totally different direction. They met in California and had me. So yeah,
And they did not stay together, correct?
correct. My stepdad really raised me. He was a trucker. But yeah, my real father and my mom were together for a year. And if I didn't look so much like him, I would not claim him. But yeah, we talked maybe 10 times or maybe 20 times. And I've seen him maybe 10 times in my life. But I learned a lot. But, just in that short amount of time, the interactions that we had. His mom was a wonderful woman, discovered that her father was the first Black businessman in Corpus Christi, Texas. And she talked about these monuments or whatever named after him, the times that I interacted with her. And I'm like, okay. And she had a mural of my great grandfather on her wall. I remember that as a kid. And so when I got older, I said, let me go find this stuff. So I went to Texas and went to Corpus Christi, and no one had ever heard of grandfather's last name's Leathers. And I end up stumbling on this older security guard, and I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of lost. I was in a science building, of course, and I ended up was lost, just kind of trying to feel my way through Corpus Christi, just trying to find some history on my family. And he's like, who are you looking for? And I said his last name was Leathers, and he's like, you know what? There's the Leathers complex. It's right down the street. So long story short, my great grandfather had an apartment complex named after him, Leathers. And in that apartment complex, there's a mural of him and all this stuff. And it was just amazing going there and seeing this. And it actually had some information on my grandmother. And last part of this, there was a lady that showed me how to get there. She pointed, older lady that showed me how to get there. When I told her I was the great grandson of this guy, I think it's E.M. Leathers. My God, I'm sorry if I forgot the initials wrong. But she's like, you're not going to believe this, but she was like in her 80s. I was your great grandmother's nanny, so to speak. They had a daycare center. She showed me where the business was. She showed me where the house was. It was just unbelievable.
And you just happened to strike up a conversation with this woman by chance. Isn't that cool?
Amazing. Huh. Yep.
And that gave you an insight that you did not have into your family's history.
I think one of the biggest obstacles that people experience, I don't care who you are, if you don't have that foundation of success, just knowing that there are people in your family or in your life that are like you that have been successful, it's hard for you to latch on to success. It's hard for you to believe in yourself. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's harder. I've got other examples of people that reached out to me in my life and said, hey, you know what, you're smarter than you think you are, buddy. And that helped. And I'll never forget those individuals. But having that connection from a family perspective is tremendous.
I'd like to go back to an earlier comment. You mentioned the Jim Crow era, and a lot of our younger listeners would have no knowledge of what that means. And I'd appreciate you taking a few moments and explaining it.
Sure. So in the States, unfortunately, there was a period of slavery that lasted 250 years, 300 years. Don't quote me on that, but around that long. And after the Civil War, 1861, I believe is when the Civil War started. And it ended in 1865. There was a period of Reconstruction where basically the United States was dealing with the fact that we have these freed slaves. So what do we do from a government perspective and laws, et cetera, et cetera? So one of the things that came out of that reconstructive period was Jim Crow, and they called it separate but equal. So basically, the slaves that were freed, there were separate statuses as far as your ability to go into a store, ability to go into a restaurant. There were a lot of signs, basically kind of apartheid-like in the States. And that went on for close to 100 years. So there are people that I won't mention that were alive when this was still going on. It ended in 1965. So it just ended about 60 years ago. So there are still people with I call it a slave mentality that still exists to this day, and very influential people that still exist to this day. But anyway, that period, there was obviously a big shift once the Equal Rights Amendment, I believe, was what passed during that time. There's all kind of other things that transpired. You can almost call that another reconstructive period after the civil rights movement. And I think we're still really transitioning in that
Yeah.
period right now. What do you see in this, with this whole movement to distance away from DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion? But that's happening in the
Okay.
States right now, basically. It's modern.
We're in a political situation in North America where we're kind of sliding very quickly away from diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I would prefer not to be doing, but it's way above my pay grade. Do you have any thoughts on what's going on?
Yeah, the reasons behind it are that we would be here a long time, but I think it's a mischaracterization of what diversity, equity, and inclusion really is. And I will say that because if you look at it statistically, companies are 30% more productive when
Yeah.
they invest in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's hard for me to imagine, and this is the mischaracterization, that I have unqualified individuals, you know, in those roles. Hence, why would my performance be 30% better if I have it? It doesn't, that logically doesn't make sense. So it's a mischaracterization, and it truly is something. And I'm so glad that BlueRock completely embraced DEI. We want diversity. I know Canada actually says we want that, which is
Yeah.
another reason why I love Canada. But just to break it down, diversity means diversity of thought. It means having individuals that are from all these other places. We're talking, on the side. I looked in the office. I had people from China, Australia, Hong Kong, Ireland. I mean, all these places, obviously from the States. What does that say about having brain power from every aspect of the globe? What's wrong with that? You know what I mean? What is wrong with it? Of course I want that. If I have an opportunity to do that, I want that. The
Yeah.
equity piece of it is simply, if we look in the States, Black women are one of the highest educated demographics in the country, but they don't get paid. The comparison to pay and education is this.
Completely off kilter. Yeah.
Exactly. So the equity piece is to try to bring that up. It logically makes sense. And then when we talk about inclusion, I was a recruiter when I worked for PepsiCo, for the Gatorade company. We would recruit at FAMU, which is one of those historically Black universities. The logic behind that was to extend. We used to recruit at the major university in Tallahassee, Florida, which is Florida State. Major university, tons of people there. FAMU is, a quarter the size of Florida State. We extended the umbrella. We included them in our hiring process, in our interviewing process. We didn't lower the standards. We just simply included them in our interviewing process. So instead of having only 10 interviews at Florida State, we had 15 because we added 5 more from FAMU. That's it. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
our standards didn't go down. One of the individuals that we hired there is still with PepsiCo 20 years later. So, that is, to me, smart. I have an
Yeah.
opportunity to go into an area that I would normally not go. And the thing is, you look at how many companies recruit at these universities, there's a big difference between how many that recruit at like a FAMU. So obviously companies aren't stretching. They're not increasing that umbrella. So I think it's just a mischaracterization. And quite frankly, it is not an intelligent move to go away from it.
Thank you for saying this. I agree 100%. And
Mhm.
I would encourage any of our listeners who are not familiar with that bit of history, and it's a significant piece of history for North America and for the United States, that they should look into it and be aware of it. Anyway, thank you. So let's go back to your parents for a moment, if we could. I guess, was it your parents or your mom and your stepfather that moved to California?
Correct. Well,
And
so my mom actually, she was already in California.
okay.
Right. And she met my stepdad, who's the trucker, who basically, raised me. They met in Los Angeles, I believe. And I was born in Los Angeles, but I was raised mostly in Stockton, California. I don't know. A lot of people know about Stockton, California.
I'm old enough to know about Stockton. I've never been. I don't know what the reputation is now, and forgive me, but it had a pretty rough reputation back in
No
the
doubt.
60s, 70s, into the 80s.
Yes, that is correct.
So you grew up in what, the 70s in Stockton?
Yes, that is correct.
And what was that like?
So very interesting because my mom and my stepdad were able to buy in the late 60s. They bought a house for, I believe it was $16,000, and it was about 1,100 square feet, and it was in an area that was pretty diverse. So we had European Americans, Black Americans, Asian Americans, even Hispanic Americans. There were pretty good mixture of people that were able to buy these homes. That transitioned and became mostly Americans of African descent, maybe 10 years into, us living there. And there was, I would say, impoverished areas that weren't far away from there that bled into that community. So when I look back, I can look at each house and see that basically there was this person that had dealt with gun violence and they passed away. And this person, that person, yada, yada, yada. You can pretty much do that throughout the entire neighborhood. And unfortunately, my brother, just older, I have an older brother, but he was in the middle. He was killed via gun violence. That was, I think it was 83, 84 when he was killed. And we never found out who actually did it. But yeah, my family experienced that. So that neighborhood was pretty rough. We spun off of some of the Crips and Bloods and all that I'm sure you've heard in South
I've heard
Central
of
LA.
it, but I am so privileged to be a white male in Canada. And what you're referring to, you grew up in what I think is a Hollywood story. And I'm embarrassed by the privilege that I enjoy.
Boys in the Hood is a movie that was made.
Yeah.
So if you wanna take a look at that movie, I don't think it was that bad for me, but
Wasn't that
I
far
think
off.
wasn't I would say around me, that's accurate. I think what differentiated me from others was my ability to play sports. And also I played an instrument, so I played trumpet. And so I was a part of the jazz band. I was singing in a group when I was in the 8th grade. Yeah. And so I think those things, playing sports and all that stuff, just kept me out of trouble. Again, I can't say the same for a lot of my friends in that neighborhood, but yeah, that's what kind of helped me.
So you were the youngest of 5 kids.
That is correct.
And one of your brothers, unfortunately, was murdered. And your other siblings, have you stayed in touch with them?
Yeah, unfortunately, my oldest sister, she passed away from diabetes,
I'm sorry.
chronic illness, and her family stayed in LA. So a lot of my nieces and nephews are there. My middle sister, we're the closest, and she's in Stockton, and my oldest brother is in Stockton as well. So yes, I still stay in contact. We actually have a family reunion in June.
Well, so you were playing sports and music, and it sounds like you were keeping your nose out of trouble. How were you as a student in high school?
Why you gonna ask? You know,
You're a better athlete than you were a math major.
There's no question about
Me
that.
too.
No question about that. I think the light bulb didn't go off. It's a confidence thing. I really, I look at that now, and it's, my MBA, I was almost a 3.8, student, and I know I'm not dumb. I go back and I look back at my high school. I didn't try, and I still
Well,
passed.
you weren't interested. Maybe.
Yeah, that's probably a good point. So I was probably a C plus student, and pretty much in my undergrad, I was a C plus student. You know what I mean? It wasn't a great student. It wasn't till later on, all of a sudden I realized I had a brain. So I wasn't a great student, I don't think.
I read that you had an English teacher in high school who left an impression on you.
Yes. And so kind of like I alluded to, having that family connection is really motivating and reassuring and just encouraging, right? There were people in my life, and I can remember every one of them that just said something to me that stuck. And Mr. Pratt was his name. I took an English composition course from him. And again, with this same attitude that I described, I did try hard and I passed. I still passed. And he wrote in my yearbook, "You are the lousiest waste of talent that I've ever worked with." The fact that he said talent was what triggered me. And, because he sees something in me that I don't see in myself. And so I can remember being motivated by that because I went to, as we say here in Canada, I went to college first. It was a junior college, we call it in the States. And I actually somehow got on the media team, the journalist team, and I would interview athletes. I'm an athlete myself, but I would interview athletes. I didn't play basketball, so I would interview athletes for the school paper. So I would write things and, for the school paper and everything. And I couldn't wait to bring my press pass back to Mr. Pratt to show him, look. And he was beside himself. So yeah, he was a tremendous motivation for me. And I can tell you from an English perspective, I ended up taking, like I said, I was a mediocre student, even during university. And after I graduated university, I went back and took the main English comp course again, for your university graduation again, just to ace it and really just to master the English language even more. And I did. And of course, went back to Mr. Pratt and showed him that too.
It's funny how some people just through serendipity have such an impact on our lives. And the role of teachers and mentors, I think, is typically understated by a lot of people and not foreseen by a lot of young people. Were there any other people in your life that took you under their wing?
My football coach, Coach Washington. I was a pretty good American football player. I can say that now. and I was. I mean, I played linebacker, which is kind of the quarterback for the defense. He basically believed in me. He saw the talent. He put me in that leadership role in high school. I was heavily recruited my junior year in high school because of him. I had opportunities for a lot of Pac-10 schools, if you're familiar with that conference. And unfortunately, those things didn't materialize because I got hurt my senior year. So I ended up having to walk on at Cal State, Sacramento. But the fact that he believed in me and really just opened my world to universities, to all these schools was tremendous. And you just don't envision yourself. No one in my neighborhood was going to Cal or Stanford or University of Washington or whatever. They weren't going to these schools, and I was getting recruited, not from Stanford, but from Cal, which is still a good academic school. So it was just amazing to feel that important. And he believed in me.
So at that stage of your life, when I was that old, I had no idea what path I was going to pursue. I was just focused on sports and chasing girls and having as much fun as I could, and completely immature. Did you have a sense of the direction you were going to follow?
Not really. I mean, I think I wanted to be a lawyer. That was the biggest thing I wanted to do until I took the LSAT and I realized, okay, I don't want to be a lawyer. But yeah, I mean, I was the same kid. All those things were influencing my brain tremendously. And so my undergrad is organizational communications, which is business related. So it wasn't the passion that I felt. I started feeling the science passion later. And it was understanding my history and then also working too within the science world, which I started 25 years ago. That's where the science bug and I think the passion from a science perspective really started to ignite. And I even thought about going back to getting a medical degree, which I started a little bit, just start taking the courses and everything to get into medical school. But, again, work kind of pushed that out. But no, the real direction I think came to me much later in life. And even after graduation from university, it was later before I started to realize what I really wanted to do.
Hi, it's Jim. When we come back, Gerald talks about his early career path and why it took time to recognize what he really wanted to do. Don't go away. I'm Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGBideas, Canada's Life Sciences Leadership Podcast. Hi, it's Jim here. If you're a new listener, we'd like you to know one of the goals of this podcast is to share the personal journey of leaders in Canadian life sciences, provide some insight on who the people are behind the titles, and hear about the lessons they've learned along the way. We hope you like what we're doing, and if you do, we have a favor to ask. We will greatly appreciate you telling your friends about us and promoting us on social. You can use the hashtags NGBI, NGBideas, NGBI Podcasts, and NGBI Summit. And by the way, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your pods so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks so much for your support. It is very much appreciated. Okay, let's get back to our conversation. Hi, it's Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGBideas. My guest today is Gerald Prince from BlueRock Therapeutics in Toronto. Now, you mentioned earlier that your grandfather was a medical doctor?
Grandfather and great grandfather.
Right, right. So did
Yeah.
that kind of plant a seed that maybe you were thinking about following?
I don't necessarily believe that these kind of things are inherited. I had no idea until later on. I guess it was 15, 20 years ago. But it was after I got into the science world that I discovered that they were doctors. I didn't know my father that closely. So yeah, I mean I've met cousins, and there's like this ritual that happens every year in Sherman, Texas in honor of my great grandfather, because he was the baby doctor during the Jim Crow era. He was one of the baby doctors in the community. All that stuff I didn't know until later on. But yeah, so was the bug there because of that? Again, I'm not one to believe that those things are inherited necessarily, but
Yeah.
maybe they are. I don't know. I also like to act. I mean, that's another thing. And
Yeah, I'm looking forward to
right.
chatting about that.
We'll
So,
talk about that.
now,
Uh,
your grandfather had an interesting side hustle that I read about. What else did he do?
Yeah, so if he couldn't fix you, he could bury you then too. So he was a
What's the
mortician.
Undertaker?
That's
So
correct.
it's like, oh no,
Yeah.
that didn't go well. I read that and I laughed out loud and I thought, wow. So if he didn't fix you, he'd bury you. So you graduated from high school, you went to Cal State, and you got this degree you mentioned in organizational communication. I'd like to go back to that. I have the faintest idea what that means. What is that?
It's really a business concentration within the communications department, if you will. So like within communications, you can be a journalist, you can be some
Oh,
other
okay.
things, but it's a business connection. And I actually started a panel my junior year in university where we aligned speakers from the business department with speakers from the communications department. And we had a panel once a month or whatever. We would invite speakers from the business
Oh,
community
that's
to
cool.
come in and actually do speeches and whatnot. So it was really that connection, if you will. And a part of the org com degree was the whole leadership understanding and all the things that are associated with leadership. A lot of case studies like with Hewlett Packard and other companies just on how to deal from a leadership perspective. And that definitely helped me in what I do now. And pretty much I've been in leadership roles for 30 years now.
College down in the States has got a very strong fraternity culture. Where did you get involved in that at all?
I did. I was vice president of my fraternity, Phi Beta Sigma, which is a historically Black fraternity that originated at Howard University, which is one of the historically Black universities. And again, for the listeners, because of slavery, Jim Crow, a lot of African Americans weren't able to go to universities. So what they did during that time, they basically came up with their own universities. So to this day, you still have historically Black schools, that obviously now take everybody, but at the time took the African American students that couldn't go to regular university.
Now, did you also have jobs while you were at school?
Oh yeah. I was a waiter for the old spaghetti factory, there's one here in Toronto.
Oh,
Uh,
down on the Esplanade.
yeah. Yeah, I did waiting. I waited tables mostly while I was in school. I didn't
I
have the
tried
money
that
necessarily to.
once and I lasted half a shift. I have all the respect for waiters and it's a tough job and teaches you a lot to think about public relations, but also about yourself. And it's real tough. So, do you have any stories from that part of your life where you thought, like in my situation, I was going to wring somebody's neck and I thought, I shouldn't do that.
Well, in my case, I remember I was the same way. I had never waited tables before. I had busing job or something in high school, but I never waited tables. And the old spaghetti factory was busy. So turning over tables was really important. And I remember my first day basically in the wine cellar crying because I couldn't keep up. I just couldn't keep up. And I remember the manager at the time, he just basically took my tickets from me and said, just go sit down somewhere. So it took a minute for me to really get good at it. If you know the old spaghetti factory, they have a trolley car that's in the middle of the restaurant. And your best waiters have the trolley car because you're turning tables over fast. People want to be in there, right? And I was, one of the waiters that would get that later on. Eventually became a bartender there and a manager at the restaurant. So
Climbing the ladder is kind of a theme in your life, and I'm looking forward to talking more about it. You graduated from college, and what year would that have been?
I'm not telling you.
1937. Oh, so you eventually went, was it to Penn State and did an MBA?
Yes. Yep.
And I read that one professor in particular during that time taught a leadership class, which also left an impression on you.
Yeah. If you remember, there was a time in which Pintos, okay, so we're definitely
The
dating.
car,
So, okay, yeah.
the one that exploded all the time.
Bingo.
Yeah, okay.
Well, this professor was an engineer for the
He
recall
was
department.
responsible for the
He
explosions
was, he was, and I think a part
or
of
identifying
his,
them.
what he was, and a part of, I think his, what do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for? To make him feel better about the situation.
Like kind of restitution.
Yeah. He would teach us these things, teach talk about the events
Did,
and
here's the
and
mistake I
actually,
made.
well, I mean, so he didn't, obviously they didn't recall it right away. And for those of you that don't know, basically they manufactured this car with the gas tank outside of the frame of the car. So if there was an impact, the gas can basically would erupt, and several people lost their lives.
Yeah.
And the way the car basically was like an accordion, because once you would have that impact, it would kind of close in and buckle in and trap the individuals inside of the car. So yeah, it was bad. Now the thing is, though, there were other small cars that were out during that time. And again, I'm dating myself here, but Datsun, they had a car. Jim smiling.
Yeah, yeah,
There was a gremlin, if you remember that.
yeah.
Okay.
Wasn't
So,
before the movie.
right. Exactly. So those cars actually had just as bad, if not worse, accident rates than the Pinto. And he made sure that we all knew this. And again, I guess what part of his therapy, right, was to get that out there, that his decision not to recall right away, really, it stemmed on the market, the rest of the market, and doing the right statistics to show that we're really no different than, the other cars that are out there. So that's,
Huh.
that was one of the stories. Now, he also was an engineer for the Challenger, so I mean, this guy was really
The
smart.
jet?
No, the Challenger that exploded. And
Okay.
so with that, he gave us an assignment where we had to, he basically transitioned that into a race car kind of scenario, because with the Challenger, there were some O-rings or whatever that didn't respond well to the cold, and it
Right.
got cold in Florida, and those O-rings failed, and that's why the
Blew up.
Challenger
Yeah.
exploded. Well, they knew about those O-rings and they still decided to fly. Well, he basically transitioned the story without us knowing into a car racing kind of scenario where the car had some issues with oil leakage, and they never figured out why it leaked in a race before, but they felt like, we still need to race in this upcoming race. And it was, do you race or do you not race? And so it was, I think 2/3 of the class said we still race because there was a lot of money involved or whatever. And a third of us were like, no, we shouldn't race because we haven't identified what the true problem was from the previous incident, which again was basically the Challenger recreated, via this race story. And
Wow.
then we had to defend, with these, with two of, because it was me against two other people that thought we should race. I had to defend why I thought we should not race. Yeah, so
Huh.
definitely left an impression, I think, on all of us.
That sounds like such a cool experience. You graduated and you ended up getting a job at Oscar Mayer in Larry, California. How did you land that job?
I started with Oscar Mayer really because I was a manager, as I mentioned, for the old spaghetti factory, and was kind of right out of school. And I remember negotiating with the owners of the old spaghetti factory. Hey, this thing's paying $8 an hour. You guys got to up my salary. That just tells you how much money I was making back then. And they didn't want to, so I left and I moved up to Stockton, my home, and commuted into Modesto, California for this job. And I ended up relocating to Tulare, California, as you mentioned, and then actually to Madison, Wisconsin, which got me out of California for the first time.
Going from California to Wisconsin, that must have been a bit of a culture shock at a whole bunch of different levels.
It was tremendous.
What was that like?
Well, I tell you, one, it was cold, of course. And, I had never really experienced snow. I think I went to Lake Tahoe once, like right when I turned 21, just to say I can gamble. and didn't see much snow at all throughout my life. So Madison was definitely that. But what impacted me more probably was just the cold. I don't think it warmed up at all. I mean, I remember driving in Chicago in June, and it was still a dirty block of ice on the side of the road. And I'm like, okay, that's too much. And Madison was 100 or so miles from Chicago, where I lived. So yeah, it was definitely a difference. I tell you, the people experience was so rewarding. Just being a part, I worked in the largest Oscar Mayer plant in the world. I can't remember how many, maybe 2,000 people there or so, maybe 1,000 people. Sorry, and so you had a lot of local people there. So just interacting with people that I've never interacted with before was just tremendous. So having the university experience, of course, living away from home is always tremendous. I think everybody has to experience that in life. But then when you move away, there's a completely different element,
Yeah.
to growth with people and all that. And I think that fueled me to experience everything else in the States. And so I moved from there to the Northeast, to the South, and back to California, back to the East Coast again, and down to Florida. And now I'm here in Toronto.
So after Oscar Mayer, you went to, is it Bausch?
Yep, I was with Bausch and Lomb briefly in Rochester, New York, which kind of helped me understand what to expect moving to Toronto. So weather-wise, and actually Rochester gets way more snow. But yeah, I was with Bausch and Lomb, so that was kind of my first pharmaceutical experience,
Hmm.
which kind of lit the bug, I think, for me.
And then you, from, I guess, New York, you went to New Jersey, and then you left the company. Why did you leave?
It was opportunity. It's all centered around me just finding what I think is a better niche for me. Rochester was, again, from a weather perspective, we got over 100 inches of snow a year. Okay. So it was just a lot of snow. And I think what's inspired me to move is to get more responsibility. I think in every job that I've had, it's wanted greater responsibility. I've always felt that how I lead my interactions with people, my understanding of people, how collaboration is so important. I felt that I had a good message. I felt that I had a good plan. So if I didn't feel like things were moving fast enough for me, I was moving out and trying to find something else.
Lots of ambition, which led you from Bausch and Lomb to Lipton, correct?
Lipton, yep. It was in Lipton. And that plant actually closed. So I would have stayed. They wanted to relocate me to Independence, Missouri. I just wasn't feeling that at the time. So from there, I went to PepsiCo in
They're back in California.
Exactly. Correct.
And that was what, in Oakland, and you were with the Gatorade division, was it?
Gatorade, yes, that is correct.
So you just kept climbing up this ladder, and it sounds like there were a lot of remedial managerial jobs that, okay, been there, done that, let's go to the next level kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it locked in with Gatorade. I like to think that everything before Gatorade was just education. It was part of my education. I was young and just inspiring to try to do better, do more. And I didn't see that company that wanted to foster that. PepsiCo definitely showed me that. Starting in Oakland, I started off as a supervisor, did very well from that perspective, actually became a quality supervisor. I was a manufacturing supervisor and got to the quality world for a brief time. And then actually became an engineer. I was a process improvement engineer briefly.
An engineer, not by license, by role.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
That is correct. And process. One project I worked on was trying to reclaim some of the wasted Gatorade and send that to a yeast production company where they would use the sugars to grow the yeast. I definitely I know we were doing it for another company, and I kind of engineered, masterminded on how we were going to get all of our waste Gatorade into a tanker and get that to this company. I did that, and then got an opportunity to be the production manager in Kissimmee, Florida, in a small one-line facility. And I was in Oakland for 2 years and then relocated to Kissimmee, Florida for that role.
There were, 7 factories in Kissimmee?
Negative. No, there were 7 Gatorade plants. Right, correct. Throughout the country.
There was a performance issue there when you got there, wasn't there?
There was. So basically, this one-line plant is one of the original Gatorade plants. If you understand, Gatorade originated in Florida, right? For the Florida Gators. So going way back. So this is one of the original plants. It was basically not too far from the University of Florida. And actually, Kissimmee is where Disney World is, near Orlando. And it was a great place to work. But from a performance perspective, when it came down to safety, quality, output, even cost, it was number 5 out of those 7 plants. And I just remember running around Lake Merritt in Oakland, just envisioning what I would do to kind of turn that around before I actually relocated, because I did the research already and knew, how well the plant was performing. And as a production manager, you own that. That's your responsibility, is to, fix the cost, fix, your performance, fix safety, fix quality, all those things. And so I went in there understanding that, did, I would say a couple of weeks of assessment and just getting to know people and all that. But then I had a meeting with the entire group, with the entire production team, and was just honest. This is where we are. We're number 5 out of 7. I think, one, we're competitive. We want to win. Most of us do. And I knew that would just energize some people by showing where we were. And so they were like, really? We're number 5, out of 7? Oh no. I promised to them that we would address whatever concerns that we're seeing. We would be very transparent about it. We actually would post, any questions or concerns that people would have. I would post those questions or concerns, and then I would identify who's responsible, and we put a target date on that, and we crossed them out as we went, and that was visible to everyone. So when you're coming in and off the production floor, you saw what we were working on. So they knew that we were being honest and transparent about our performance and things that we needed to address. So we did that. We started checking off things. There were opportunities with my coworkers as far as them wanting to own responsibility. And I won't mention names in this particular situation, but our engineering manager, we would meet every day about the previous day's performance. And I think it's really important to understand what your output could be. If everything ran perfectly, how much can you produce? That's 100, and you came in at 70. Explain the 30 widget difference, right? And then you should be able to explain that in time. So, well, we had 20 widgets of downtime associated with X or Y or whatever. So that's how we ran those meetings. And it was a real big finger pointing. Hey, it's the production guys doing it. They're shutting off their equipment, yada, yada, yada. So it was a collaborative building I needed to do with that person, just to say, hey, look, we're all on the same page. I definitely know my team, they make mistakes, but I'm sure your team's not perfect. And so let's just be honest. Let's go after what's real, and don't be concerned about, if anybody looks bad or whatever. We shouldn't be concerned about that, because if we win, we'll win together. So we really, really built that relationship. And over time, our performance started to emulate that. And, unfortunately, a lot of times in those situations too, you might have some people, most people will align, most people will say, hey, yeah, this makes sense. Let's do what we need to do. You might get some that don't. I think it's really important to, hold those individuals accountable. It's like you have to make sure that we are all on the same page. So some of that happened. Not everybody that started was there at the end, but, again, it wasn't tremendous, and it was done with a lot of care and compassion and a lot of opportunity to give people a chance to kind of see what we needed to do to be better. It's important, right, from a community perspective, that we keep this plant open, that we keep jobs in the community. All those things are very important. So, we all need to align to that. Bottom line, we went from 5th to 1st, not only from an output perspective, but from a quality perspective, a safety perspective. And so much, it was a one-line plant. We reduced our cost per case so much that we were able to build another line in that plant.
Wow.
So we became very competitive as a plant. And it's, to this day, I'll drive by there. They've done even more, since I've left. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, absolutely something to be proud of. Hey, it's Jim again. Don't go away. When we come back, Gerald and I talk about how his career path began and why it took him time to recognize the path he eventually followed. Stay tuned. I'm Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGBideas. I mentioned earlier that one of the goals of this podcast is to promote the next Great Big Ideas Summit. NGBI is an independently organized, not-for-profit fundraising event in support of McMaster Children's Hospital in Hamilton, Ontario, and I'd like to take a moment to talk a bit more about the organization. Mac Kids is one of the top critical care pediatric hospitals in Canada, serving patients and families in need over a huge geographic area that encompasses Niagara Falls, Brantford, Hamilton, Burlington, north to Guelph, Waterloo region, and up to Owen Sound on Georgian Bay. It serves a population of over 2 million people, and the work done by the team at Mac Kids saves lives every day. So, if you have an interest in supporting a very worthy cause, we hope you will consider supporting Mac Kids. For more information, please go to hamiltonhealthsciences.ca/McMaster-Children's-Hospital. Now you know our why. Let's get back to the show. Hi, it's Jim Wilson, and my guest today is Gerald Prince from BlueRock Therapeutics in Toronto. So you eventually ended up, I guess, in Atlanta, and it sounds like this is a pretty busy time in your life.
Well, yeah, I have my twins. My twins were born. So Atlanta is the largest Gatorade plant. At least it was. I think there's been one or two that have been built since I was there. But it was the largest Gatorade plant. So again, Gerald, Mr. Ambition, I was in Kissimmee, did fantastic. I want to do more. I want to go to the largest Gatorade plant. So I did, went there. Things didn't really go the way I expected them to go. You know, I wanted to be a site head, as I've mentioned to you already. And that wasn't materializing fast enough for Gerald. So that's when I left the company and took a job with Nestle in the Allentown area and was there only a year because things didn't work out there so much. You know, we were opening, I think, 5 plants. It was a water plant. And that changed due to a lot of regulations or whatever. So the site opportunities weren't there. So long story short, my passion for science kicked in, and I was at a time in my career where I felt a transition was needed. So then that's when I went to Sanofi and became a scientist.
And that was 2007, and
Correct.
you went to Sanofi in Swiftwater, Pennsylvania, and
Correct.
I was thinking maybe you just missed the snow. That was really the motivating factor. Sanofi has a large flu vaccine facility there with quite a few people. Is it like 1,000 or 2,000 again?
Well, the site is about 2,000, but no, the flu specifically was not. You know, maybe 100, maybe 200. I don't think it was that many though.
And so you were
correct. That is correct.
And then you, I guess, at some point during that role, you also got into construction.
Yeah, you can say that. Yeah, the many hats. So when I started with the company, we were building 59 basically, which was a state-of-the-art flu manufacturing building. They have since now built building 79, I think is the number. I'm not sure. And I think here in Toronto, they've actually built a new flu building too. But yeah, when I started, it was a shell. So I helped with all the validation activity. Yes, bringing in equipment, all of the upstream processes. I basically kind of own getting that coordinated. All of our inoculation equipment because we were bringing in 600,000 eggs to inoculate with the flu virus. So I helped organize all that and dealt with the construction team, with the equipment team, all the validation activity as mentioned. So yeah, it was a huge experience for me getting that groundwork of construction and really the beginnings of the process, so to speak, within a pharmaceutical environment, you know, GMP pharmaceutical environment. So we building the clean room, right? Just understanding the HVAC setup and number of air exchanges and all that lovely stuff. I really got into that just to get that building started.
So you were there for 8 years, and in February 2016, I think you left to become operations manager at Amcor in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And you were there for under a year. And in December 2016, you became associate director of manufacturing at AbbVie in New Jersey. Could you walk me through that?
Yeah. So again, Mr. Gerald, I interviewed for a deputy director role at Sanofi and was denied it. And so I didn't quite understand. And again, I really believe in my mission. I believe in, you know, what I could deliver to a group of people and to really have an influence over a complete process. And that opportunity wasn't presenting itself fast enough for me. So with that, the operations manager kind of was a return to the whole bottling the Gatorade world, but it had more responsibility. So I had maintenance, the facilities team that I've mentioned in, my past experiences. They actually reported into me. So I had the engineering group reporting into me and the manufacturing team reporting into me. So that was the lure. And, so to get that responsibility to really own the process, so to speak. And of course, I knew the business because it was bottling. So that was why I went back. So I did it. We actually had a similar situation to where we weren't performing at the expected level when I first started. They somehow did well a year before that, but they really didn't know why. So when I came in, I encountered, a lot of downtime and all these issues. So from my experience, I knew kind of how I quantified it to you before. It's based on time and your maximum output. Explain why you're not making that. So I really got us focused on that. And then we went after those things that weren't giving us that output, right? And of course, we would put that in a priority order and what are the biggest issues, and we would go after them. One thing that we did too differently was we got our individuals that were actually on the floor, that were actually operating our equipment, to have some ownership and responsibility into communicating how well we performed the night before. So they had to come in front of us and basically say, okay, so we ran 80% performance, and the 20% was due to X, Y, and Z. And I tell you, that really made a difference because people knew that, hey, I'm accountable here for how well we're performing, and I need to go and present that to the leadership team so they know what we're doing about it. And it made a big difference. And it's sustainable when you do that because now they have that ownership. And of course, I have a rule, a 5-finger rule of performance, safety first, quality always, output, cost, and you have to reward. You have to do some kind of celebration. So we set up targets for celebration, and they knew that too, right? So as they got better, we would celebrate those accomplishments, and lo and behold, all of a sudden we're running a lot better. And we were able to return to that glamour that one year that they couldn't explain how, and we were able to sustain that over time. But I left because I got an opportunity to be a director. And that came up, and it was within the pharma world. So I'm like, adios, I'm out. I'm not going to lie. It was a big pay increase to go
That helps.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, right. That helped motivate me too. But yeah, that's why I left. It was still a tremendous experience, even though it was short lived.
So you were with AbbVie for 4 years, and it sounds like that was not a difficult transition. It was something that interested you and based on the work that you had already done. And then October 2020, you left AbbVie to join, is it Wuxi?
Ushi.
Wuxi Advanced Therapies, and they're based in Philadelphia. Were you recruited for that role, or did you seek it out?
I seeked it out, and the reason was because actually when I started with AbbVie, we were LifeCell. We were LifeCell probably 2 months into my time with them before we were bought out by Allergan. Allergan lasted for a year or so, and then we were bought out by AbbVie. So there was a lot of leadership changes there, and basically my job was eliminated. I was provided time to find an opportunity, and I was able to do that with Wuxi. And I was able to start working again with an individual I worked with at Sanofi, and I'm not going to mention his name, but we actually commuted together, and he was the site head at Wuxi. So it was an opportunity to work with him again. It's a combination thing of them seeking me, and it seemed like a good mix. And I was actually in the middle of my MBA at the time too, so it all.
Oh, so you were there for maybe a year plus or minus, and you jumped again to take a similar role with the cell and gene therapy company in Gainesville, Florida. Where did you end up?
So Gainesville is promotion, so director role, and really an opportunity to be the site head in Florida. And the trick though here is that it was a biotech, company, it was a cell gene therapy company. So there's some volatility there. We started off as a microbiome company that within 2 months, 3 months, whatever, we were bought out by a cell gene therapy company. And then right before I left, we were bought out by a CMO. So there was a lot of transition with that particular site. My lure was promotion, opportunity to be a site head, and it was materializing very nicely until, of course, all that volatility and transition. So I started looking again, and the best job I've ever had surfaced. And it's the
Hmm.
job I've been in for almost 3 years now.
Now, on the personal side, you were married with twins at the time?
They're the babies. I have two older children too, a son and a daughter. The twins are the babies.
Okay. And are you still together with
No,
the
we've
mom?
been apart for 5 years now.
Okay. And so I hope everybody's doing well. And I guess in mid 2022, you became aware of an opportunity in Toronto as a senior director of GMP manufacturing, which you just said you've been in, and it's the best job that you've had. And actually, when we first met, you said that. And I'd like to talk about BlueRock and how you ended up here, but why is it the best job you've ever had?
I had a HR director who I still stay in contact with from AbbVie. She told me, says, whatever job you find, you want to be in a place where you're your authentic self. I can play a role. I've had good bosses, bad bosses, all that kind of stuff, and I survive, but I'm definitely more effective when I'm myself, when I can be myself. When I interviewed I had choices before I left. Scepter was the name of the company, before they became Kinsell. I had options. I could have stayed in Florida as a vice president, actually. There was a role there. But when I saw Seth, our CEO, talk about our Parkinson's drug, he teared up. He teared up on just how impacting that drug is. And I saw that. I was like, that's where I'm working. That's the place I need to work. And I actually knew someone from the Inceptor Bio world that knew Seth and just raved about him. And just listening to him. And then, of course, during the interviewing process, meeting with all of the individuals that I'm working with now, I had that sense of, this is my world. This is a Gerald world. All these individuals they're like me. I mean, in a lot of ways, they're nerdy and, they want to find out what else is around the corner. They're all that. And they love having a good time, but they're serious about their passion for science. I saw that. And I'm like, that's me. So all I've done is experience that. Now, on top of that, I'm the chairman for the Toronto Leadership Council. So basically all of Toronto, I'm the chairman, where I have obviously some influence on how Toronto operates. I'm the MAR 7 highest ranking individual in MAR 7 as senior director. So a lot of the site responsibilities are on me, and heavily I'm influencing that. So all the things you've heard throughout my career, I've always wanted, right? I want it. I'm getting that from that. It's your oyster to go ahead and manipulate it. And I say all these things not to, put a feather in my own cap. It's because of the type of leader that I am. I get ideas and collaboration from everyone else to make what we have so beautiful. So it is the greatest job. At Jim, I owe you a tremendous amount of credit because because we expanded in Mars 7 and, now we have this beautiful space, which you have to come and visit. And I actually mentioned your name during our inauguration, if you will, to bring on the new space as one of those main individuals that helped us get this.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
Well, it's true, right? And so all of this is just the most beautiful experience I can say I've ever had. And living in Canada, living in Toronto has just made it even that much better. For all those reasons we've talked about, just moving from the States, Toronto has just been beautiful to me.
We're going to talk about that in a minute, but here we are talking about BlueRock, and we haven't really explained to our listeners what it's all about. It's a company that I think was founded by Doctors Gordon Keller and Michael Laflamme, who are at the McEwen Stem Cell Institute, the University Health Network in Toronto. And this is a company that I think was founded in 2016. Bayer eventually purchased the company, so it's a unicorn and a Toronto born and bred unicorn. And it's into cell and gene therapy. If you could build on that very basic description, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, our big drug, which I mentioned, we are attempting phase 3 right now. We've got other platforms that we're looking at, but our primary focus right now are in neurology and in ophthalmology. So from a neurological perspective, designed to replace dopamine for Parkinson's patients because they lose that. We basically are able to take pluripotent stem cells and differentiate those into these dopaminergic neurons. And we can have those surgically injected into Parkinson's patients. We did 12 patients during our phase 1. And right now we're positioning ourselves for phase 3. We're doing some phase 3 work here, but it's also being done in Berkeley, which is where the Bayer site is. So that the biggest primary focus right now, as I mentioned, the ophthalmology aspect, and that stems more from a photoreceptor disease focus, and we're preparing for phase 1 in that realm. But primarily here in Mars, what we're working on is, we call it DL1, but it's the dopamine for Parkinson's patients.
Hi, it's Jim. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, Gerald and I talk about the research being done at BlueRock Therapeutics in cell and gene therapy. Stay tuned. I'm Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGBideas. If you're a new listener, we'd like you to know this podcast is also part of Next Great Big Ideas, Canada's Life Sciences Summit. NGBI is an annual national networking event for the Canadian life sciences community, and we invite you to join us. For details on tickets and sponsorship of this year's summit, please go to nextgreatbigideas.com. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show. I'd like to talk about Mars in a moment, but we're talking about cell and gene therapy, and again, for our listeners, but mostly for me because I don't have a science background. What is it?
Well, to get into it too much, I don't want to, because I want to make sure we protect our
30,000-foot overview.
Okay. So for us, using a stem cell, we take stem cells from donors. And, if you know stem cells, they're very young, they're very impressionable, if you will. So to transition or differentiate those into different neurons is very possible. So we've developed that ability to differentiate those pluripotent stem cell into something that's more advanced from a cell perspective. So when we're talking about neurons, obviously that's not as used. So we're able to do that. We're able to have those emulate and actually regrow, or should I say regenerate within the brain, those things that were lost due to disease. So these neurons that we are able to differentiate into neurons actually replace those cells that were lost due to disease. They're actually replacing those. This is where I get very weird, because I do believe we're at the cusp of understanding for human life expectancy. We're at the cusp right now of extending that tremendously, because if you can replace cells that are the same cells that your body generates, if you can regenerate those things, there are things on our planet that regenerate. And I'm not suggesting that we're going to live this long, but there are obviously much more simplistic cells, but they live 15,000 years. I mean, it's amazing what you can do from a regenerative perspective. So I think we're breaching that. In 100 years or maybe even less, we're going to see some changes in how our life expectancy will be judged.
Well, and thank you for that. Cell and gene therapy, Toronto is a global hub for cell and gene therapy research, and it is absolutely astounding what is going on here. It just blows my mind when I sit down with people and I go, okay, can you explain that? And when they do, I go, holy Andy, that is so cool. And it's happening kind of off the radar of the general public. And it's extraordinary what's going on here. And it's not just Toronto. It's in Montreal. It's in Vancouver. It's in Edmonton. It's right across the country. It's just so interesting. So you're obviously a tenant at Mars, which is, for the uninitiated, 1.5 million square foot life sciences incubator at the corner of college and university in downtown Toronto. What's that like, going to work there every day?
So I have a story. When I was first recruited here, when I did all the interviews and everything, and I remember telling my boss, it's like, well, am I going to get a chance to see where I'm going to work? Because I'm coming from the States, all the way from Florida. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. I don't know what I did. Somehow, I put in the wrong address. And the address I put in was not even in Toronto.
Okay.
It was in Mississauga. So somehow the same address or close to it was in Mississauga. And so I stayed at a hotel near where this was, right? You want to be close to your interview and or where you're going to go and do your tour and all that stuff. And I'm looking at the picture and I'm like, warehouse, you know what I mean? I'm like, this is not very attractive. And then the next morning, I actually did the right Google search and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this thing is downtown Toronto. What am I doing? So I drive and I'm just floored when I walk in, and I've never lived in a town, in a city before anyway. That's already kind of a country boy, even though I've lived in the hood, so to speak. We were pretty close to cows. So it may have been a hood, but the cows were wearing the same colors as we were. That's a joke you may not get. But anyway, yeah, it was absolutely stunning to walk in here, to have food in the same building. I can go and actually get food in the same place. I mean, this is crazy. No, the building is amazing. And obviously the space, our 7th floor, we had some opportunities to get our area organized in 5S and all that stuff. And we've really done an amazing job to do that. But really, the views, all those things, tremendous, really.
Yeah. It's a special place.
It is.
Where is cell and gene therapy going to be in, 100 years down the road? I think it's going to be like 5 years down the road. Yeah. We're going to see just the next generation of medicine coming out of this, and personalized medicine that is specific to each patient. So, yeah, you have that. But I think there's opportunities for us to make drugs that a lot of patients can use. So it's definitely on the cusp. There's no question. I think anytime you're talking about regenerative medicine, is life expectancy extending. There's just no question about it. And obviously with a lot of the cell gene therapies and fighting the cancers and whatnot, that in itself, will again extend life. And I think you're right. Those things are 5 years away. We have to do some work to not put ourselves in these positions, right, where we need these kind of therapies. And I think that will help us even more. But I do agree with you. I think, we're on the cusp. I think us as a organization, BlueRock, we have some ideas, some platforms. Cardiomyocytes is one area that actually, is near and dear to you from, what you've recently experienced, to rebuild our heart muscle. It's a regenerative process to rebuild the heart muscle when it comes down to, heart failure. So, what's the number one killer for North America? Basically, it's either cancer or it's heart disease. So, the cell gene therapy aspect, focused, more from a cancer perspective. And then there's potential regenerative opportunities to rebuild a heart muscle. It's definitely a nice positive outlook. There's no question. And it's such a privilege to be at this table. And I'm absolutely a guest at the table of the Canadian life sciences community. You're an American living in Canada. You've been here for just about 2.5 years. What's been your biggest surprise? I think for me, one, as I mentioned, I'm living in a big city has been tremendous. I mean, it's being able to get to places and all that stuff. I love it. Food, all that stuff. I'm a foodie. But I think the biggest surprise for me is the niceness that I see from people. And I know that's cliche. I know Canadians, but I do believe it's very genuine and very true. I can give you one best example. I don't drive a lot. I love to drive. But since I've moved downtown, I don't drive. You don't have to, and I don't really like it. But there's a really good example of Canadian kindness. If you're in an intersection, and you've been waiting in that intersection, turning left, or so in the intersection. If there's cars coming the opposite direction to beat the light, so to speak, if the light turns yellow, they will stop and allow that person in the intersection to turn left. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, and I think I'm living in a different neighborhood. That's hilarious. Well, in the States, sorry, if you're in that lane turning or in the intersection turning, they're going to just blow right by you, and you're going to be out in the middle of the intersection when the light's red. I'll grant that I think, and this is a broad generalization, that there's, I think, more consideration Canadians show than more others might. It's such a privilege to also be Canadian. Are we going to convince you anytime to change your passport? Sir, I am in the process trying to get my PR. Unfortunately, my age is not helping me. I would rather have a 30-year-old PhD than me, but that's my obstacle. But I'm absolutely, unequivocally trying to pursue that. I want to buy property. News. Oh, yeah. I want to live here. There's no question about it. I love it. I mean, I really do. I love it. In all honesty, I think this is kind of a touchy subject, but I mean, you kind of know my history.
You know what I've come through as a African of American descent, and I think the historical things that people deal with in the States don't apply necessarily in Canada. So there's a little bit of an error, something that you experience in the air. It's hard to explain that I feel different when I'm here by comparison to being there. Now, again, I've obviously been successful, so it's not like I've had things hold me back or whatever. It's not like I haven't been able to survive, and it's not like I haven't been able to build a beautiful life in the States. So I don't want to be too harsh on the States. Definitely, right? There's some stories right now we can talk about. But anyway, I don't want to be too harsh on the States from my past. But there is just a feeling that I just don't feel when I'm here by comparison. I know when I travel, when I'm home and I feel like I'm home, I'm at home in Toronto. That's
so good to hear. Huh.
And that is the truth.
As you're saying that, the thought that goes through my mind is all of the people in Canada that think we're hard done by or that want to separate need to go outside of our borders to see what it's like and then come back and say, you know what, we've got it really, really good here. You mentioned at the outset of the interview that you've got a side hustle, and I'd love to talk about that for a second. What's the side hustle, sir?
So I mentioned to you that my father wanted to get in acting. We talked about this once, and I basically said, sir, I am going to get a career that makes money. I know I will have money for my children. And I know acting does not guarantee those things, So I never really pursued it until later on. But around 2007 or so, I got into acting. Back then, I did a few national commercials within the States, did a lot of industrials, which would be used for training videos, etc., which are, by the way, some of the hardest acting jobs, actually. Very difficult because you're reading from a teleprompter, but you have to know everything by heart because you can't technically be reading from the teleprompter. You know what I mean? You need to be able to interact like you're actually having a conversation with them. Commercials. I've done a lot of independent films. Yeah. So it's something I've kind of, over the last 10 years or so, put off to pursue my career, my day job. But recently I made a movie, an independent film, a small short about a year ago that we've had at a couple of film festivals. So that it's done pretty well. But that's my side hustle.
That's so cool. Good for you. This has been so much fun, and I really appreciate your time. We end all of our NGBideas podcasts with the same question, which is this: what's the next great big idea on your horizon?
Well, I from a company perspective, I think we're going to keep our eyes and ears wide open to obviously the next best regenerative process that we can imagine. We have some ideas out there. I kind of mentioned the cardiomyocytes as something potentially, but we're really hyper focused right now from a neurological perspective. So there could be something coming down the horizon more centered on that. But long term, we're going to be looking at other things that rebuild the heart or rebuild the brain as well, of course, as I mentioned, eyes, all those things. That's what we're seeing. It's all about regenerative medicine. And again, to me, if we're going to extend life, that has to be a part of it. It has to be included.
There's so much cool stuff going on here. And I'm not saying this to make you feel good. We're so fortunate to have people like you in the mix helping make things happen. And I know you're very busy, and I really appreciate your time to join us today, Gerald. Thanks so much.
Jim, you make my heart, skip a beat when you say that, because I really want to be here, and it's so beautiful to be wanted. I mean, I think we have a beautiful thing here. There's no question, and we're going to help so many Canadians, so many Americans, so many people from the States. It's just beautiful to be a part of this, and it's great knowing people like you.
Thanks so much. That was Gerald Prince from BlueRock Therapeutics in Toronto, Ontario. If you'd like to learn more about the work Gerald and the team at BlueRock are doing, go to bluerocktx.com. You can also follow the company on social at BlueRockTX. For information about this podcast and our other shows, please visit nextgreatbigideas.com. You can also follow us on social at NGBI Podcasts, and you can follow me at Lab Occupier. To learn about what I do when I'm not hosting podcasts, please visit jim-wilson.ca and you can learn about my team and what we do at laboccupier.com. This episode of NGB Ideas was researched by Xenia Pinto and edited by No Limit Marketing. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email. My address is jwilson@Leonard, that's LENNARD.com, and we look forward to hearing from you. I'm Jim Wilson, and you've been listening to NGB Ideas.